Jesus Christ the Messiah is a narcissist. He did not stop the rapist, the child molesters, the child marriages. He even supported many child marriages in the Bible. He spoke about women as main properties to men, and that women are supposed to be under men and not seen as their equal or above men, for there would be a lot of chaos if a woman would rule. But what about Deborah as a judge in the Bible? Eve, Gomer, Hagar, Leah, Lot's wife, Queen Vashti got blamed in the Bible. Women have always been the footstool of men. We have allowed men to crumble us because we did not know our worth. For our grandmothers, aunts, nephews, cousins, and mothers were programmed to appease men, and you have become brainwashed to do the same thing. To accept abuse on all fours, like a dog on a leash, and when you refuse to go with the norm, you get a backhand to your face. Women, we need to rise up, for you are still allowing men to rule over you when you have your own throne and crown, and all you need to do is grab a dustpan and brush the dust off. Stop being a fucking Cinderella and stop losing your damn glass slippers for some creep who only likes you for your looks and not for your brain. Women are the strong powerhouse. Women, you need to teach each other how to be a powerhouse and not a power hose or hoe in a man's dirty garage toolbox. Narcissistic traits of Jesus. 1. Self-exaltation. Jesus often referred to himself as the Son of God and the sole path to salvation. His repeated emphasis on his unique divinity and demand for reverence suggests a self-centered focus that can be interpreted as self-exaltation. 2. Demand for loyalty. The call for complete loyalty from his followers reflects a need for control. He instructed followers to forsake family and possessions, demanding unquestioning allegiance that mirrors authoritarian leadership. 3. Lack of accountability. Jesus' teachings sometimes ignore the consequences of his statements, particularly on marginalized groups. His failure to fully acknowledge the ramifications of his words suggests an evasion of responsibility, characteristic of narcissistic individuals. 4. Manipulative charm. The charisma attributed to Jesus, particularly in his use of parables and compelling rhetoric, raises questions about manipulation. This charm could be seen as a means to achieve personal goals at the expense of his followers' autonomy. 5. Entitlement. Jesus' expectation that people worship him and view him as the ultimate authority reflects a sense of entitlement, common among narcissists. His insistence on reverence suggests a belief in his own superiority. 6. Rejection of criticism. Jesus often responded to challenges with sharp rebukes, demonstrating an intolerance for dissent. This response style indicates a lack of willingness to engage with differing viewpoints. 7. Grandiosity. His proclamations about his unique role and ability to perform miracles reflect grandiosity, setting him apart in a manner that demands admiration and worship. 8. Fear induction. Jesus' warnings about severe consequences for non-believers invoke fear, suggesting a tactic to maintain control that aligns with narcissistic behavior. Sadistic tendencies of Jesus. Demand for suffering. Jesus taught that followers must take up their cross and endure suffering, which can be interpreted as a callous disregard for the pain experienced by individuals, glorifying suffering rather than offering solace. 2. Warnings of eternal punishment. His frequent references to hell and eternal damnation for those who did not follow him invoke fear and anxiety, potentially reflecting a sadistic pleasure derived from the distress of others. 3. Miracles as control. While Jesus performed miracles ostensibly to help, these acts also assert his power and manipulate faith. Such displays of power can be interpreted as a means of control over belief and obedience. 4. Rejection of emotional connections. Jesus sometimes prioritized his mission over personal relationships, urging followers to abandon familial ties. This demand indicates a lack of empathy for the emotional pain such decisions would cause. 5. Indifference to suffering. At times, Jesus responded to human suffering with theological discourse rather than compassion, indicating a troubling indifference unless it served his purposes. 6. Exclusivity in salvation. The insistence that belief in him is the only path to salvation reflects a sadistic trait, highlighting the satisfaction he may derive from the knowledge that many would be condemned for disbelief. In the Gospels, particularly in the accounts of Jesus' teachings, there are passages where he appears to demand absolute loyalty and adherence to his authority, which reflects dictatorial tendencies. One illustrative story is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 14, verses 25 to 27. The narrative: as Jesus travels, large crowds follow him. He turns to them and makes a shocking statement. "If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple." He goes on to describe the necessity of renouncing everything one has to follow him. He compares the decision to follow him to a man who builds a tower without first calculating the cost, and to a king going to war who must consider whether he can defeat his opponent. Interpreting the story: demand for total commitment. Jesus' call for followers to hate their families can be interpreted as an extreme demand for loyalty that prioritizes his mission over familial and social bonds. Jesus required absolute allegiance. He was an authoritarian, suggesting that personal relationships and individual desires must be sacrificed for the sake of following him. 2. Use of fear and consequences. By emphasizing the consequences of not following him, including the metaphor of carrying one's cross, Jesus invokes a sense of fear and obligation. This use of fear to compel obedience is often associated with dictatorial regimes that seek to control through intimidation. 3. Elimination of personal autonomy. The demand for followers to renounce everything they have to follow him, which is stripping away personal autonomy. Dictators often require absolute loyalty and conformity, and Jesus' insistence on prioritizing his path over personal desires mirrors this tendency. 4. Exclusivity and rejection of dissent. The idea that only those who fully commit to his teachings can be considered true disciples implies a rejection of any alternative perspectives or interpretations. This exclusivity is reminiscent of dictatorial leadership styles that demand unwavering support and discourage dissent. The teaching on hell. In the Gospels, Jesus speaks about hell more than any other figure in the New Testament. His descriptions often include vivid imagery of punishment and separation from God. For instance, in Matthew 25, verse 41, he describes hell as a place prepared for the devil and his angels, and in Mark 9, verses 43 to 48, he warns of hell as a place where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. Interpreting the teachings. 1. Eternal punishment. The notion of hell as a place of eternal suffering can be seen as fundamentally cruel. The idea that individuals may be punished forever for their actions in a finite life raises ethical questions about justice and mercy. This eternal punishment reflects a vindictive nature, suggesting that a loving deity would not subject anyone to such a fate. 2. Manipulation through fear. Jesus' frequent warnings about hell can be interpreted as a tactic to manipulate followers into compliance through fear. By presenting hell as a real and terrifying consequence for sin, he employs coercive methods to ensure adherence to his teachings, reminiscent of authoritarian figures who use fear to control their subjects. 3. Conditional love. The concept that one's relationship with Jesus, and by extension salvation, hinges on adherence to his teachings, introduces a conditional aspect to his love. This contrasts with the notion of unconditional love and grace, suggesting that acceptance is dependent on meeting specific criteria. This conditionality reflects an inherent cruelty in his message. 4. Judgment and exclusivity. Jesus' teachings often imply that those who do not accept him or follow his teachings face judgment and condemnation. Jesus was an elitist, suggesting that only a select group is worthy of salvation, which raises questions about the nature of love and acceptance. A figure who draws lines between the saved and the damned is someone who lacks compassion. 5. Lack of redemption for non-believers. The emphasis on hell as a final destination for those who reject Jesus' teachings indicates a lack of opportunity for redemption beyond this life. A truly loving and just figure would offer pathways to forgiveness and redemption rather than a permanent separation from goodness. dictatorial behavior in Jesus' teachings. One illustrative story from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 14, verses 25 to 27, captures Jesus' dictatorial tendencies. The narrative. As Jesus travels, large crowds follow him. He turns to them with a shocking statement. "If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple." He emphasizes the necessity of renouncing everything to follow him. Interpretation. 1. Demand for total commitment. Jesus' extreme demands for loyalty reflect an authoritarian stance, prioritizing his mission over familial bonds and individual desires. 2. Fear and consequences. By emphasizing the need to carry one's cross, he instills a sense of fear and obligation reminiscent of dictatorial regimes that control through intimidation. 3. Elimination of personal autonomy. The call to renounce all personal possessions strips away individual autonomy, echoing the demands of authoritarian figures who require absolute loyalty. 4. Rejection of dissent. The implication that only those who fully commit to his teachings are true disciples showcases a rejection of alternative perspectives, paralleling dictatorial leadership styles. Jesus was a troubled man. Harsh responses to suffering. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 15, verses 21 to 28, a Canaanite woman approaches Jesus begging him to heal her demon-possessed daughter. Initially, Jesus ignores her and later responds, "It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." This statement is derogatory and dismissive. Such a reaction demonstrates a lack of compassion and an insensitivity to the woman's desperation. 2. The cleansing of the temple. In the accounts of Jesus cleansing the temple found in all 4 Gospels, he overturns tables and drives out merchants and money changers with a whip, John 2:15. This act of aggression could be viewed as violent and overly aggressive. Critics may argue that his actions lack restraint and kindness, portraying a side of Jesus that is angry and harsh. 3. Response to doubt. When Thomas, one of his disciples, doubts the resurrection, Jesus' response in John 20, verse 27, could be seen as lacking empathy. Instead of providing reassurance, he invites Thomas to touch his wounds, which can be interpreted as a somewhat cruel way to prove his point. Some people might view this as a nasty way to deal with someone's genuine doubt. Jesus Christ is no friend of mine. I consider him less than any human on earth. Jesus had the opportunity to become a real hero, but instead he became a mockery of his own reflection, guiding him to total self-destruction.